Hey everyone, I'm Cassandra, and today I'm sharing the most devastating story of my life. 6 months ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I was a successful 32-year-old software engineer with a steady job, a healthy savings account, and what I believed was a loving, supportive family. But sometimes, the people you trust most can become your biggest threat, and nothing could have prepared me for what was coming. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from around the world, and if you've ever dealt with family trying to take advantage of your financial success, or if you've been the responsible one in your family who everyone expects to fix everyone else's problems. Go ahead and hit that like button right now. Trust me, you're going to want to subscribe for this one because this story has more twists and turns than a Hollywood thriller. So let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, with my parents Julia and Donald Wilson, and my younger sister Allison. From the very beginning, it was clear that my parents had completely different expectations for me and my sister, and I mean completely different. When I was just 10 years old, my allowance came with actual budgeting spreadsheets. Yes, you heard that right, spreadsheets at age 10. Every dollar I received had to be accounted for, planned for, and saved for specific purposes if I wanted new clothes for school. I had to save up for them over weeks or months. If I wanted to go to the movies with friends, I needed to work for that money and plan it into my budget. My parents were relentless about this. My father would sit me down at the kitchen table every week, pull out my savings account statements, and review every single transaction with me. Money doesn't grow on trees, Cassie, he would say at least once a week, sometimes more. By the time I was 15, I was working my first real job at the local library, shelving books and helping with basic administrative tasks. During my junior and senior years of high school, I worked at an ice cream shop, serving customers and cleaning up after long shifts. My parents were proud of my work ethic, but they were also incredibly demanding about it. There was no room for laziness, no room for financial mistakes, no room for anything that wasn't perfectly responsible. When it came time for college, they insisted I apply for every scholarship possible. They pushed me relentlessly to get the best grades, to volunteer for everything, to build the perfect college application. And thanks to their pushing and my own determination, I managed to secure enough scholarship money to cover about 70% of my tuition at the University of Washington. For the remaining 30%, I worked not one but two part-time jobs throughout college. I worked mornings at a campus coffee shop, getting up at 5 in the morning to open up and serve coffee to barely awake students and faculty. Then I would go to my classes, and in the evenings, I worked at the computer lab helping other students with technical problems and maintaining the equipment. I lived in the cheapest dorm available, ate mostly ramen noodles and whatever I could get from the campus meal plan, and graduated with minimal student loans that I paid off completely within 3 years of starting my career. Now, here's where the story gets really interesting. My sister Allison, who is 3 years younger than me, seemed to live in a completely alternate universe with the exact same parents. When Allison wanted new clothes, our mother would take her on shopping trips to the mall, coming home with bags full of outfits from expensive stores. When Allison needed money for a school trip, our father would write a check without asking a single question about the cost or whether she had tried to save up for it herself. Allison's allowance came with no strings attached, no budgeting lessons, no spreadsheets, no lectures about the value of money. It was just cash to spend however she wanted, whenever she wanted. When I pointed out this obvious and frankly shocking double standard, my mother would give me the same explanation every time. Your sister is more sensitive than you are, Cassie. Not everyone can be as naturally responsible as you are. This phrase, naturally responsible, became a weapon used against me throughout my childhood and into my adult life. It was as if my parents believed that being responsible was some kind of genetic trait I was born with, rather than a set of habits and values that they had literally forced me to develop through years of strict financial discipline. After college, I moved to Seattle permanently for a job at a growing tech company. I started as a junior developer, working long hours and constantly learning new technologies to advance my career. Over the course of 10 years, I worked my way up to become a senior software engineer with a salary that many people would consider quite good. But here's the thing that might surprise you. Despite my income growth, I maintained the same modest lifestyle that my parents had drilled into me from childhood. I rented a small one-bedroom apartment in a decent but not fancy neighborhood. I could have afforded something much nicer, but I chose to live below my means. I drove a reliable used Toyota that I bought with cash, no car payments, no fancy features, just dependable transportation. I brought lunch to work most days, making sandwiches and salads at home rather than spending $15 or $20 a day on restaurant food. I treated myself to dinner out only occasionally, maybe once or twice a month, and even then I usually chose reasonably priced places. Every month, I would carefully review my expenses, make sure I was staying within my budget, and put a significant portion of my income into savings. I had goals, I had plans, I had dreams of eventually buying my own place. While my coworkers were buying expensive cars, taking lavish vacations, and living paycheck to paycheck despite good salaries, I was building wealth slowly and steadily. Meanwhile, Allison's pattern of financial irresponsibility continued and actually got worse as she entered adulthood. She changed her college major 4 times, extending what should have been a 4-year education into 6 years, all fully funded by our parents. They paid for every additional semester, every new set of textbooks, every change of direction without ever asking her to contribute a single dollar or to explain why she kept changing her mind about her future. After graduation, she bounced between jobs like a ping pong ball, never staying at any position for more than 8 months. She would quit because the work was too hard, or because she didn't like her manager, or because she felt the job was beneath her, or because she wanted to take 3 months off to travel and find herself. And every single time, our parents supported her decisions and her lifestyle. When Allison came up short on rent, our parents paid it. When she decided work was too stressful and she needed a break, they covered her car payment. When she accumulated $15,000 in credit card debt buying designer clothes and taking weekend trips to Las Vegas with her friends, our parents paid off the entire balance without even asking her to explain how she had spent that much money. I watched this pattern repeat over and over again throughout our 20s. Allison would make irresponsible choices, face the consequences, and then get rescued by our parents. Meanwhile, I was building my career, saving money, and living responsibly, but I never received any financial support or even recognition for my efforts. Whenever I tried to express concern about this dynamic, my father would dismiss my worries with the same phrase, "Allison is still figuring things out. Not everyone knows their path as clearly as you do." It was as if my sister was permanently stuck in adolescence, while I had been expected to be an adult since I was 10 years old. I loved my sister, I really did. But the double standard was incredibly frustrating. When we were together at family gatherings, I could see that she had absolutely no concept of financial responsibility. She would show up wearing new outfits with tags still attached from expensive boutiques, talking about the trendy brunch spots she had tried or the concert tickets she had purchased for shows that cost hundreds of dollars, all while working part-time at a clothing boutique that barely covered her gas money. Despite this inequality and frustration, I focused on building my own life. I worked hard, earned promotions, and slowly built my savings account. I had a clear goal in mind. I wanted to buy my own place. Not a mansion, not a luxury condo, just a modest home that would be mine. After years of careful planning and disciplined saving, I finally reached that goal. I had enough money for a down payment on a small condo in Seattle. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple 2-bedroom unit in a decent neighborhood, but it would be mine. The mortgage payment would actually be less than what I was paying in rent, which meant I would be building equity instead of just paying someone else's mortgage. I was excited about this achievement, proud of the work I had put in to make it happen, and ready to take this next step in my life. When I received an invitation to come to my parents' house for dinner on a Sunday in April, I thought maybe they wanted to celebrate my home buying plans. I had mentioned it briefly during our last phone call, and though they hadn't seemed particularly excited at the time, I thought perhaps they wanted to surprise me with their support and congratulations. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was, how completely and utterly wrong I was about what was coming. I arrived at my parents' suburban Portland home at exactly 6 o'clock, just as I had been taught to do since childhood. Punctuality was one of the many values they had drilled into me. The familiar smell of my mother's homemade lasagna filled the air, my absolute favorite meal from childhood. The table was set with the good china, the special plates and silverware that were usually reserved for Thanksgiving and Christmas. There was even a bottle of wine already open and breathing on the counter. Cassie, right on time as always. My Mother Julia said, hugging me tightly. She looked nice, wearing a blouse I hadn't seen before, and her hair had been freshly colored to hide the gray that had been appearing more frequently. My father Donald came in from the living room, checking his watch before greeting me with a quick hug. Traffic wasn't bad, was it? He asked, pouring me a glass of wine without waiting for my answer. No, the drive from Seattle was smooth, I replied, though I noticed how my parents exchanged a quick glance that made me feel uneasy. Something felt off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. Where's Allison? I asked, noticing that the table was set for just 3 people. Oh, she couldn't make it tonight, my mother said quickly, perhaps a little too quickly. She's in San Diego with some friends. A last-minute trip. You know how spontaneous your sister is. We sat down to dinner, and my parents kept the conversation light at first. They asked about my job, about the weather in Seattle, about a book I had mentioned reading during our last phone call, but they seemed distracted, not really listening to my answers. My father kept checking his watch repeatedly, and my mother kept refilling my wine glass before it was even half empty. After we finished the main course, instead of bringing out dessert as was our family tradition, my mother cleared the plates and then returned to her seat. My father cleared his throat, straightened his posture, and folded his hands on the table in a way that immediately made me nervous. Cassie, we have some exciting news, he began, his voice oddly formal and rehearsed. We've helped Allison buy a house. Oh, I said, genuinely surprised, but trying to be supportive. That's wonderful news. I didn't realize Allison was looking to buy, or that she had managed to save up enough for a down payment. My mother laughed, but it sounded forced and artificial. Well, you know your sister. When she falls in love with something, she just goes for it. She found this absolutely perfect place in the West Hills neighborhood. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, a gorgeous view of the city, and its walking distance to all those cute little shops and cafes. I nearly choked on my wine. West Hills was one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Portland, where houses routinely sold for close to $1 million. That sounds incredibly expensive, I managed to say. It is an investment in her future. My father stated firmly, as if this explained everything. The housing market is only going up, and it's an excellent neighborhood. The schools are top-rated. Schools? I asked, confused. Is Allison planning to have children soon? Is she even dating anyone? Seriously? The last I had heard, my sister was still very much enjoying the single life with no plans for settling down or starting a family anytime soon. My parents exchanged another look, and my mother reached for a folder that had been sitting on the sideboard throughout dinner. She slid it across the table toward me, and I stared at it as if it might bite me. The thing is, Cassie, my father continued, his voice taking on a tone I had never heard before, we took out the mortgage in our names since Allison's credit isn't, well, you know how it is. But we've realized that with retirement coming up in a few years, we really can't afford the monthly payments. I stared at them, not touching the folder, my mind racing to process what they were telling me. So you're planning to sell the house? Or Allison is going to take over the payments herself? My mother pushed the folder closer to me, so close that it was almost touching my hands. We need you to take over the payments, sweetheart. The room seemed to tilt slightly, as if the earth had shifted beneath my feet. I opened the folder with trembling hands to find mortgage papers for an $800,000 home with a $750,000 mortgage. The monthly payment was over $4,000. This is a joke, right? I looked up at their serious faces, searching for any sign that this was some kind of elaborate prank. You cannot be serious. You want me to pay for Allison's house? A house that costs nearly $1 million. You have a good job, Cassie, my father said, his tone hardening in a way that reminded me of my childhood when I had disappointed him. You've always been good with money. You have more than enough saved up to handle this. More than enough? I felt my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. I've been saving for years to buy my own place, a modest condo that I can actually afford, not a mansion in West Hills. Family helps family, my mother said, reaching across the table to take my hand. I pulled it back instinctively. Allison needs stability to get her life together. You know how much she struggles with responsibility. Where is Allison right now? I demanded, my suspicion growing. Does she even know you're asking me to do this? She's really in San Diego, my father said, though he couldn't meet my eyes. And yes, she knows we're talking to you about helping with the house. So she's on vacation while you ask me to pay for her luxury home, I said, the full scope of what was happening finally hitting me. Why isn't she here for this conversation if it's so important? She was nervous about how you'd react, my mother admitted, and for the first time, I heard a hint of shame in her voice. She knows you've always been judgmental about her choices. I sat in stunned silence for a moment, trying to process the magnitude of what was being asked of me. My parents had bought my financially irresponsible sister a house they couldn't afford, and now they expected me to foot the bill because I had been responsible with my money. They were punishing me for my good decisions by expecting me to pay for her bad ones. No, I said finally, my voice firm despite the trembling I felt throughout my entire body. Absolutely not. I will not pay for Allison's house. Cassandra Marie Wilson, my father said, using my full name exactly the way he had when I was in trouble as a child. You have more money than you need. Your sister deserves a nice place to live just like you do. I have worked for every single dollar I have. I shot back, my composure finally cracking. I have saved and sacrificed for years. Allison has never held a job for more than 8 months. She has never saved a dime in her entire life. That's not fair, my mother protested, tears starting to form in her eyes. Your sister has different strengths. Not everyone is good with money like you are. Being good with money isn't some magical inborn talent, Mom, I said, my voice growing louder. It's about making responsible choices day after day, year after year, something you have never expected Allison to do. The conversation completely fell apart from there. My father's voice grew louder and more aggressive as he lectured me about family obligations. My mother started crying, saying that I had always been jealous of the special bond she shared with Allison. They brought up every favor they had ever done for me, every childhood memory where they had supported me, conveniently forgetting the years of complete financial self-sufficiency I had maintained while they bankrolled my sister's every whim. If you don't help your sister, my father finally threatened, his face red with anger, you are not the daughter we raised you to be. I stood up from the table, my whole body shaking with anger, disbelief, and heartbreak. Maybe I'm not, I said, looking directly at both of them. Maybe I'm better than that. I left without another word, leaving the mortgage papers sitting untouched on the table, leaving my parents sitting there with their unreasonable expectations and their complete lack of understanding about what they had just asked of me. For 3 days after that disastrous dinner, I ignored all calls and texts from my parents. And believe me, there were many. Each message was more guilt-laden than the last. Your sister is heartbroken. We raised you to care about family. After all we've done for you, this is how you repay us. I threw myself into work, trying to process what had happened, trying to understand how the people who had raised me could see me as nothing more than a financial resource for my sister. Had they been planning this all along? Had they encouraged my responsible habits specifically so they could eventually tap into my savings to fund Allison's lifestyle? On the 4th day, there was a knock at my apartment door. I looked through the peephole to see Allison standing there, her eyes red and puffy as if she had been crying for hours. Against my better judgment, I let her in. Cassie, please, she started the moment the door closed behind her. You have to help me. I love this house so much, and I had no idea Mom and Dad were going to ask you to pay for all of it. I thought they were just going to ask you to help out a little bit. She looked around my small apartment with barely disguised disdain, taking in my modest furniture and simple decorations. It's not like you're using your money for much anyway. You live like you're still in college. I live within my means. I corrected her, trying to keep my voice level, and I've been saving to buy my own place. But you could still help me and do that, Allison insisted, as if this were the most reasonable thing in the world. You make so much money at your fancy tech job. Something in her phrasing struck me as odd. Wait a minute, you said you had no idea they were going to ask me to pay for all of it. So you did know they were going to ask me for money? Allison's face flushed red, and I could see the truth in her expression before she even spoke. Well, I mean, we talked about it a little bit. You were in on this from the beginning, I realized, saying it out loud as the pieces fell into place. You knew they were going to ask me to pay for your house, not the whole mortgage, Allison protested weakly. Just, help out until I get on my feet financially and find a better job. You have been getting on your feet for 10 years. Allison, I said, my patience finally exhausted. When are you actually going to stand on them? Our argument escalated from there, with Allison becoming increasingly defensive and entitled, until she finally stormed out of my apartment, slamming the door so hard that my neighbor poked his head out to check if everything was okay. That evening, I finally answered one of my parents' many phone calls, determined to set the record straight once and for all. "Cassandra," my father began formally, "we need to discuss the situation with your sister's house." "There is no situation," I replied firmly. "I am not paying for Allison's mortgage." End of discussion. "We have already put down a substantial down payment," my mother chimed in from the background. "We took it from our retirement fund because we believed you would help with the monthly payments." I felt my blood run cold. "So you made a massive financial decision based on money that I never offered or agreed to give. That is not my responsibility to fix. We are family," my father insisted, his voice growing hostile. "Family takes care of each other." "That's funny," I pointed out, "because that principle only seems to apply when Allison needs something, or when you need something for Allison. It never applied when I was working 2 jobs in college, or when I was eating ramen noodles for dinner 5 nights a week to pay off my student loans." The conversation devolved into accusations and guilt tripping, with my parents' tone growing increasingly hostile as they realized I wasn't going to cave to their demands. "You will regret this selfishness," my father finally threatened before hanging up the phone. A week later, I received a call from my Aunt Eleanor, my mother's sister who lived in Eugene. "Cassie, honey," she said without any preamble, "what's this I hear about you refusing to help your sister?" I explained the entire situation, expecting another lecture about family obligations and how I should just go along with what my parents wanted. Instead, Aunt Eleanor sighed deeply and said, "Those fools. I told Julia this was a terrible idea." Then she dropped a bombshell that left me speechless. "Did you know they emptied their retirement accounts for Allison's down payment? Nearly $300,000 gone." The revelation stunned me completely. My parents were in their early 60s, just a few years away from retirement, and they had just decimated their retirement savings for Allison's house. Now they expected me to take on an additional financial burden to fix their incredibly poor decision. Over the next few weeks, the family divide grew wider and more bitter. Relatives began taking sides, with most of them supporting my parents and Allison. I received passive-aggressive emails from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, all lecturing me about family loyalty and responsibility. My grandmother called to tell me she was deeply disappointed in my selfish attitude. Only Aunt Eleanor and my Uncle Philip stood by me, understanding the completely unreasonable position my parents had put me in. They had watched this dynamic play out for years and weren't surprised that it had finally reached this breaking point. Concerned about how the situation was escalating, I scheduled a meeting with a financial advisor named Gabriela Martinez. She listened to my story with increasing alarm, shaking her head in disbelief at several points. "You need to protect yourself legally," Gabriela advised when I finished. "Given how determined your parents seem to be, I wouldn't be surprised if they try something else to get access to your money." I thought she was being overly paranoid, but 3 days later, a certified letter arrived at my apartment. My hands shook as I opened it to find legal papers inside. My parents were suing me for $500,000, claiming that I had verbally agreed years ago to help with family expenses in return for their investment in my education and future. According to their lawsuit, my entire financial success was contingent on their support, and therefore I owed them recompense. Now that they needed it, it was a complete and total lie, a fabrication from beginning to end. But there it was in black and white, with a court date set for just 6 weeks away. The panic attack hit me the moment I finished reading the lawsuit papers. My chest tightened, my vision blurred at the edges, and I couldn't catch my breath. I slid down against my apartment wall, the papers clutched in my shaking hands, gasping for air and fighting waves of dizziness that made me feel like I was going to pass out. When I could finally breathe again, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years and spent the entire day researching attorneys. By afternoon, I had secured an emergency appointment with Lawrence Thompson, a family law specialist with extensive experience in financial disputes. Lawrence's office was small but professional, with law books lining the walls and framed diplomas hanging behind his desk. He was an older man with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He reviewed the lawsuit documents while I sat nervously across from him, my hands still trembling from the stress of the situation. "This is," he began, then paused, removing his glasses to rub his eyes. This is quite frankly one of the more absurd lawsuits I have seen in my 30 years of practice. But absurd doesn't mean harmless. Even frivolous lawsuits can be dangerous if they are not properly defended, so they can't really win, right? I asked, trying to keep the desperation from my voice. It is highly unlikely, he replied. Their claim that you verbally agreed to financial support is extremely difficult to prove without any documentation. However, he cautioned, family court can sometimes be unpredictable, especially when emotional appeals are involved. We need to build a strong defense. Over the next few days, we made a disturbing discovery. My parents had falsified documents claiming that I had promised financial support. They had created backdated emails and letters in which I supposedly acknowledged a debt to them for raising me and putting me through college. These are completely fake, I told Lawrence, staring in disbelief at the documents he had received. Through legal discovery, I never wrote any of these emails or letters. I suspected as much, Lawrence replied grimly. The good news is that this forgery will completely undermine their case. The bad news is that your parents have just committed fraud, which could have serious legal consequences for them. The realization that my own parents would go so far as to commit forgery to try to take my money left me feeling completely numb. What had happened to the people who had raised me, who had taught me right from wrong? Were they always capable of this level of deception and manipulation, or had their devotion to Allison corrupted them so completely that they had lost their moral compass? I threw myself into preparing our defense with Lawrence's help. I gathered bank statements showing that I had supported myself financially since college graduation. I found old emails thanking my parents for birthday gifts, but clearly indicating that all financial support had ended after high school. I even located my college financial aid records showing that my education had been funded primarily through scholarships and my own work-study jobs, not through parental support. The process of preparing for the lawsuit took a tremendous toll on me physically and emotionally. I developed severe insomnia, lying awake at night replaying my entire childhood and questioning every memory through this new lens of betrayal. My appetite completely disappeared, and I lost 7 pounds in just 2 weeks. At work, I made careless coding mistakes that were completely unlike me, drawing concerned looks from my manager and coworkers. My coworker Heather noticed my deterioration and invited me to lunch one day, over sandwiches that I mostly picked. At rather than ate, I confided in her about the lawsuit and everything that had led up to it. My parents did something similar to me, Heather revealed, completely surprising me. Not a lawsuit, but they emptied my college fund to pay for my brother's gambling debts. I know exactly how it feels to be the responsible one who gets punished for being responsible. Her understanding was like a lifeline in an ocean of judgment. Most people I had told about the situation immediately asked what I might have done to cause such a rift, as if parents suing their own child must somehow be the child's fault. A week before the court date, I ran into Allison at a coffee shop near my apartment. I hadn't even known she was in Seattle. She was wearing expensive new boots and carrying a designer handbag that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Are you happy now? She demanded loudly enough that other customers turned to stare at us. You're tearing our family apart with your selfishness. I'm selfish? I kept my voice low despite my anger. You're living in a house our parents can't afford while they sue me for money I earned through my own hard work. How exactly am I the selfish one here? They have given up everything for me, and you won't help at all, Allison shot back. Do you know Dad is talking about coming out of retirement to pay the mortgage? They're going to lose the house they bought for me, then sell it, I suggested, as if this were the most obvious solution in the world. Get a place you can actually afford. I am not selling my dream home just because you're being stingy, she snapped. I deserve that house. I deserve to have nice things too, Cassie. Deserving has nothing to do with it, I replied. It's about what you can afford. I can afford it if you help, she insisted, as if this logic made perfect sense. I left the coffee shop shaking with anger, but the encounter had provided one important piece of information. Allison had already moved into the house despite the uncertain mortgage situation. She was counting on either winning the lawsuit or wearing me down through emotional manipulation. The day of the first court appearance finally arrived. I dressed in a conservative navy blue suit and low heels, with my hair pulled back in a neat bun. Lawrence had advised me to look professional but not flashy, to counter any narrative my parents might try to put forward about me being frivolous or irresponsible. With money, Walking into the courtroom and seeing my parents sitting at the opposite table was absolutely surreal. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes, but my father stared at me with cold hostility. They looked like complete strangers, not the people who had raised me, taught me to ride a bike, or bandaged my scraped knees when I was little. Judge Catherine Martinez was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who studied both parties with a critical eye before calling the court to order. Her initial questions revealed her skepticism about the case from the very beginning. "Let me understand this correctly," she said, reviewing the documents before her. "The plaintiffs, Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, are suing their daughter for $500,000 based on an alleged verbal agreement made when she was how old?" 18, Your Honor, my parents' attorney Benjamin Russell answered. "When she left for college, and this agreement was never put in writing. It was a family matter, Your Honor, a matter of trust between parents and child." Judge Martinez's eyebrow rose slightly. "I see. And the defendant has submitted evidence that these supposedly supporting emails are forgeries?" "We dispute that characterization," Benjamin replied smoothly. "There may be some confusion about dates and content." "Confusion," the judge repeated dryly, "about who wrote the emails and when they were written." Interesting choice of words, counselor. The first day in court made it clear that this would not be a simple or quick resolution. My parents' attorney painted me as an ungrateful daughter who had benefited from their sacrifices only to abandon them in their time of need. Lawrence methodically presented evidence of my financial independence and the falsified documents that undermined their entire case. By the end of the day, Judge Martinez seemed increasingly troubled by what she was hearing. Before adjourning, she looked directly at my parents and asked, "I have one question I would like the plaintiffs to consider before we continue tomorrow. Did you ever consider that your daughter might have her own financial goals and dreams?" My father answered without any hesitation whatsoever. "She has more money than she needs. Allison needs it more." The judge made a note, her expression completely unreadable. "We will resume at 9 tomorrow morning." The courtroom felt even colder on the second day, though the temperature hadn't actually changed. I sat rigidly beside Lawrence, carefully avoiding looking at my parents across the aisle. Their attorney was arranging his papers with a confidence that worried me. Despite Lawrence's repeated assurances that our case was strong, the testimony phase was brutal. My father took the stand first, speaking clearly and confidently about how he and my mother had invested everything in my future. He painted a picture of my entire childhood as an expensive training program designed to maximize my earning potential, as if I were some kind of business investment rather than their daughter. When Lawrence cross-examined him, the truth began to emerge. The actual financial contribution my parents had made to my education was minimal, less than $5,000 over 4 years. The rest had come from scholarships and my own work. My father was forced to admit that I had been financially independent since graduation, that I had never asked them for money, and that I had always been responsible with my finances. My mother's testimony was more emotional, filled with tears and dramatic appeals about Allison's sensitive nature and need for stability. But under cross-examination, she was forced to admit that they had provided Allison with approximately $375,000 in direct financial support since she had turned 18, while providing me with exactly $0 during the same period. When it was my turn to testify, I was nervous, but determined to speak the truth. I explained my work history, my financial independence, and my savings goals. I categorically denied ever making any agreement to support my parents or sister financially. When shown the forged emails, I was able to point out specific inconsistencies that proved I had never written them. The most revealing moment came when Benjamin called Allison as a surprise witness. She entered the courtroom in a conservative dress, her usual flashy style subdued for the occasion. She tearfully testified about how much the house meant to her and how my refusal to help was destroying our family. But under cross-examination, Lawrence exposed the reality of her situation. She was unemployed, had submitted 0 job applications in the past month, and had no plan for making the mortgage payments herself. When asked to choose between keeping the house and healing the relationship with me, she chose the house without hesitation. After closing arguments, Judge Martinez took the matter under advisement. A week later, we reconvened for her verdict. The courtroom was packed with family members, most of them supporting my parents. Judge Martinez's ruling was swift and decisive. She dismissed the lawsuit with prejudice, ordered my parents to pay my legal fees, and delivered a scathing critique of their behavior. She called the forged emails a serious matter that could result in criminal charges, and she made it clear that children do not owe their parents financial repayment for basic parenting duties. Most memorably, she said, "Whatever happens when you leave this courtroom today, remember that some damage cannot be undone with apologies alone. Trust, once broken, must be rebuilt brick by brick."